Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. Austin the Stache here, joined by an incredible author and doctor, Lydia Kang. Lydia, good morning. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to have you on. So you are coming to Kilgore Memorial Library on Saturday, March 8th. We're great friends with the people at the library. Deb Robertson especially comes on all the time, and they're very excited to have you. And so I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the books you've written and talk about especially like the Star Wars stuff, because that obviously that so many people are in love with the Star Wars franchises, and so to have books that also are Star Wars gets a lot of young readers into reading.
But they are definitely wonderful gateway books, as we call them.
Yeah. But the thing that I wanted to start off with is, so you're a doctor. How do you have time for all of this?
Well, I get that question a lot. I became a doctor well before I started writing in earnest. I'd been a physician for like at least 10, almost 12 years when I started writing. And at that point in time, I was part-time as a physician. I'm still part-time. So that's like the easy answer to like, how do I get it all done, is that I'm a part-time physician. And I have some amazing colleagues and staff who sort of keep me connected when I'm working from home. And so it's this really, really strange kind of combination of like my whole day is this mishmash of like checking in with patients and then writing and scheduling and doing interviews and writing and then checking in with patients. So somehow it manages to all work. I work very well on a deadline. Maybe this is just like what made me a good doctor. Like I respond very well to deadlines and to-do lists and things like that. So, but somehow it works. They balance each other out. They're two really different ways of using my brain. One is very analytical and scientific, but it's also very nurturing, very caring. And then the other side but there's also like the red tape and the paperwork and stuff. And then the other side is just sort of me being like let loose into this field of imagination where I get to just play with characters and create these huge worlds and do whatever I want. It's a pretty fun combination.
Well, it sounds like just like your professional life, your books also vary quite a bit. I actually picked up Quackery, A Brief History of the Worst Ways to Cure Everything. Loved it.
Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah, we had so much fun writing that book. It came out back in 2017, and Nate Peterson and I, we came up with this idea of writing about, like, he was more interested in like the characters, like the people who were quacks, and I was more interested in like the bloodletting and the leeches and like the mercury, like the more sort of like sciencey, like why did they do this? What did it do to your body? How is it poisonous? And the book came together in this way, and we just decided to take a really humorous tone with it. So, and it is at times like kind of a gross, like yucky book, which is, I think, also really fun, to be honest. So it took several years. We wrote a book in between called Patient Zero, which is definitely more of a serious tone. It's about pandemics and the science behind infectious diseases, like germ theory and like, where did stethoscopes come from, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But then we came back to pseudoscience, which was sort of like a natural sequel to Quackery.
Sure, absolutely. And so how do you go from, because you've published books now, since looking back like 2013, and you've sprinkled in both YA novels, adult novels, nonfiction, like you've kind of really gone all around, and you haven't like just set to one path. How do you decide this is what I'm going to write, or, this is the thing that I'm working on? How does that work for you?
Right. I like to say that I'm like I'm someone who does not know how to stay in their literary lane. Like I'm just kind of all over the place. Mm-hmm. And it started because, the first book that I ever published was young adult science fiction, as was the sequel. And then, honestly, some of the reasons why the twists and turns happened was because of the publishing environment. So my first two books, Control and Catalyst, were both dystopian science fiction. And so this was in the time of like the Hunger Games, those kinds of books and movies and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, like, the market kind of got glutted with dystopian science fiction. Nobody wanted me to write any more of that. And so even though I had more science fiction ideas for young adult, like, the market wasn't buying them. So I put those on the back burner, and I was like, well, I've always wanted, and the books that I had written before my first young adult, published novel, one of them was historical fiction. And I loved historical fiction. And so I was like, well, you know what? I got this idea sort of like, itching in my brain. I just want to get this out. And so I wrote that up, and my editor at the time was like, this isn't young adult. She was like, this is an adult novel. Did you know you wrote an adult novel? And I'm like, no, I didn't. I mean, the characters were like 18, 19, 20, but it took place in 1918. They were dealing with a lot of adult issues. And I didn't realize that the voice that I had written it with was a more adult voice. And so my agent and I were like, all right, we're just going to pitch this to the adult market. We're going to see if we can find a publisher. And so that's how A Beautiful Poison happened. That was my first adult novel. But around that same time, like, I had these other book ideas. And so weirdly, like, three things happened at once. So like Quackery happened at the same time. A Beautiful Poison got sold at the same time. Like The November Girl got sold. And so those books all came out in the same year. It was bananas. So in 2017 was just like this really, really chaotic year where three books came out in three completely different genres. And I'm pretty sure I got the flu that year. Yeah, I definitely got the flu.
I would imagine you probably caught more than the flu just from going all around. I mean, that's a lot going on.
It was. I was running ragged in the fall because I was touring for Quackery, and I had all these books coming out, and I was like, promoting them. And, I still had three kids at home. And so, this other job. So the answer of like, to like, how do you do it all? You make it look so easy. It's like, it's not easy sometimes. Sometimes like there's a price to pay. And like, sometimes my health takes a hit because I'm just doing too much, and then I need to slow down. So I'm a lot more careful about, making sure I sleep, making sure my nutrition's good, because it can be a lot if I don't balance it well. Yeah.
Sure. And since you are an expert on the worst ways to cure everything, then you now know what not to do.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's no bloodletting or leeches involved in the self-care that I do. I'm not doing any of that bizarro stuff. So
none of the arsenic facial stuff. That's
Exactly. We don't do, not taking everlasting poop pills. I'm not doing that weird stuff. It's all very common sense. But it comes in handy being, I'm a primary care internal medicine physician. And so like my patients are probably so tired of me hearing about it, but I'm always like, so are you sleeping okay? How's your nutrition? Do you exercise? Because these are all like sort of like tenets of sort of day-to-day health that is like short-term health and long-term health. And so, and I take my own medicine. So I do really concentrate. I preach, I do what I preach basically. So they're used to hearing me say that, but it's, I think it's very true. And I live by it, and it helps a lot, to be honest.
I can imagine. Absolutely. So do you have, obviously you love the science fiction part of stuff. Is there a favorite genre for you, or is there one that you have the most stories ready for?
Oh, you mean like in a particular genre? Like,
yeah.
Is there something that I've always got?
Yeah. Is there something that you particularly have fallen in love with that you love? That
Not really. I mean, there are different stories that I will fall in love with, and then I feel like I have a little bit more affection for than other stories. Like The November Girl was a book that I wrote. It was back in like 2017, and I absolutely fell in love with writing that book. It like practically wrote itself. It was no effort. It was really fun, and the idea came to me because I had this love of this song that I knew since I was like a little kid in the 1980s, the Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And so when that book came together, it just like, it was all there in my head, and I just had to like put it down, but it was so much fun to write. So it sort of depends. Like when I wrote Cataclysm for Star Wars, that was a technically very, very difficult book to write, really difficult. It had like something like 8 points of view. Like it had like so many main characters that were constantly doing things. I had to juggle it all. So it was really complicated. The rewrites were difficult, and but I was so proud of what I did. And so that's really special to me too, because I put a lot of heart and soul into some of those characters. Like I really felt for them. And so when, you know, things got really tough as the climax of the story grew, it was like hard. Like I would reread Cataclysm, like when I was doing my copy edits and line edits and stuff like that. And I would cry in certain parts of it, 'cause like I felt so much for these characters. And I think sometimes, like, you know, a lot of authors get jaded and they're like, just like, you know, pumping out these stories and they don't care a whole lot for them. They're just sort of, you know, writing for the sake of like, you know, pushing these books out. But like, you know, I do put a lot of myself into the books. I do care very much for the characters and stuff. And so there's certain ones that definitely, I feel like, have a particular special place in my heart. And I think like those are two examples of them for sure.
That makes total sense. And that really shuffles nicely into, let's talk about Star Wars, because now full transparency, I have seen the movies, but I would not consider myself a Star Wars fan. Now, that being said, I know lots of people who take Star Wars very, very seriously. Was it a daunting task being given, hey, here are the keys to the Star Wars, don't mess it up? Like,
yes, it was daunting is the exact word. It is. So I got approached to do a short story in the anthology from a certain point of view, The Empire Strikes Back, and it was for the 40th year anniversary. And what they do is they had done that for A New Hope, right? So they invited 40 authors to write these short stories that were written from the perspective of like a very minor character in the movie. And so in this little short story, you got to expand, like, what were they doing? What were they thinking? Like, what got them on the screen? Like, what was going on? And so when I got the invitation, I was like, oh, heck no, I can't do this. That was the first thing. And so I kind of read it a couple times, and I'm like, are they sure they want to ask me? Like, are they sure I'm the right person for this? And so my husband is a huge Star Wars fan, and I would say we're big Star Wars fans in that, and this is at the time, right? In that, like, we had watched the movies countless times. Like, we could just, you know, we could quote the movie all the time, things like that. We would have little inside jokes, like my husband's car is white and its nickname is TK421. So it's like, that's sort of the level of like the nerdiness that we have at our household, you know, like Star Wars ornaments all over our Christmas tree, that kind of thing. But we hadn't read extensively into like the literature, the book world of Star Wars. There were a lot of shows that were on TV that, like the Clone Wars, I watched some of it. My son watched all the Clone Wars because he was at that age when it was on. So it was like always on in the background. So I sort of like, you would tune in a little bit, but not completely. And so I just didn't feel like sometimes I was a card carrying member of like the really intense Star Wars fandom. So I was really nervous about accepting the offer. And then my husband was like, oh my God, you can't say no to this. Of course you're going to say yes. And this was before I even had any confidence. I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't say yes to this. And so before I answered back, I rewatched The Empire Strikes Back. Of course, that's fun research to do.
Absolutely.
I have research to do. I gotta watch Star Wars tonight. And as I was watching it, I was like, wait a second, there's a doctor in this movie. And it's, you know, it's like there's a Dr. Droid in the movie. And like, I think people like, you know, if you don't notice it, it's like kind of gone in a second. But you know, when he's on Hoth and he's like, you know, attacked by the Wampa, and then he's in that back to tank, you see the little droids around him, like doing their thing. Right.
Yeah.
And then towards the end of the movie, when he has, his hand put on, 21B is the medical droid or the surgical droid who puts his hand on. He doesn't say anything, but he's in the scene. And I thought, oh, I could write from the perspective of the medical droid because I know what it's like to be a doctor.
Absolutely.
I don't know what it's like to be a droid, but I have a little bit of imagination. I'm gonna see. And so I accepted it, knowing that I felt comfortable being like, this I know. This is my territory. I've tread this path for, you know, over a decade. I know how to do this. But by this time it was more like 18 years. I've been a doctor for a while.
Yeah.
So that was a story that I pitched them, and they said, great, nobody's picked him yet. You can have him. And that's how I got my toehold into Star Wars. And then after that, about a year and a half later, they invited me to write a novel for the High Republic, which is this writing initiative that happened. And it's about these stories that take place about 150 years before all of the movies begin.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of the height of like when the Jedi are at their peak, like, you know, like influence in the galaxy and stuff like that. And they invited me to do that. The second I got that email, I was like, oh, heck no, I can't do that. And it was the same thing all over again. And my husband's just like, you can't say no to this. It's a book in the Star Wars universe. And I'm like, that was a short story. This is a whole novel. I don't know if I can do it. And eventually I came to my senses, and I actually spoke to some of the authors who were in the High Republic, just to ask, like, hey, these are my fears. This is what I'm worried about. You know, what's it like? And they were just so welcoming and so generous and sweet, and they were really encouraging. And I was like, all right, I'm going to jump in and try to do this. And I did it.
Very nice. It sounds like your husband's one heck of a guy.
Oh, he's just one. He is like to be like, it's not a joke. He is like my number one fan. He is such a supporter of mine. And it's from the very beginning, even when I started writing, and I didn't have anything. I hadn't even gone to a class on fiction writing. I just like woke up one day and I was like, kind of feel like joining this, like, this workshop on poetry. And he was like, go for it. And then like a year or two later, I was like, kind of feel like writing a novel about people who get weird powers. And I don't know, it's just kind of crazy. And he was like, go for it, just write it. Like, and so he's always been so encouraging. He always believed in me. And so he didn't seem terribly surprised when I got my first like agent and contract. He was like, yep, okay.
Yeah, knew this was going to happen. Saw it from the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, no. So I'm just like so grateful for his support, because I know there's a lot of people who do artistic and creative endeavors and they don't always get the support of their family, and that can be really tough. So I'm pretty grateful for that.
That's fantastic. Well, do you have any books planning or in the works? Anything that you can talk about moving forward?
Yeah, I do actually. So this is kind of one of those weird years. I have a second book coming out this year. It's very different from pseudoscience. The book is coming out October 21st, I believe. And it is my first young adult novel in a while. My last young adult novel was in 2018. And so I have another book that's coming out, and it's called K. Jane. And it's with Quiltree Books, which is an HarperCollins imprint. And the book is really personal. It's another one that I really love to write. It's very special to me because it's about a Korean American girl growing up in Omaha, and all of her friends are super into like, Korean dramas and Korean pop and Korean food and stuff like that. And she feels like she doesn't even know her own culture. She's like a third generation Korean American. Mm-hmm. And it's about her trying to teach herself to be a better Korean American, and it doesn't really go very well. So the story is called K. Jane. I'm super excited about it, and it is a young adult novel coming this fall.
Very nice. That sounds incredible. I'm so excited for you to have another book coming out in October. If people would like to get to know you a little bit better, of course, they can come to the Kilgore Memorial Library on Saturday, March 8th, and get to meet you in person. And that's going to be a ton of fun. But if they want to find out more about your books, where can they find out more?
Probably the easiest place to find me is on Instagram. So Instagram, my handle is Lydia Kang. It's pretty easy to find me. And I have a website, lydiakang.com, and you can find me there as well.
Fantastic. Well, Lydia, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.